The greatest Viking ship ever found was discovered on home soil in southern Norway, purposefully buried beneath the earth for one last voyage, carrying 2 women on their way to the realm of the dead.
When archaeologists turned their AI scanners toward a lonely Norwegian farm, they thought they were mapping history, not waking it.
A year earlier, in 1903, a farmer in Osberg had come knocking on Swedish archaeologist Gabriel Gustafsson's door in Oslo.
He wanted to open it to see if he can find something interesting, and he certainly did.
The ground trembled with strange readings, and on the screen appeared a monstrous outline, huge and deliberate, buried just beneath their feet. What they uncovered wasn't a ruin or relic. It was something that should have stayed hidden forever. The day the ground spoke. In September 2019, a quiet island off the coast of Norway became the stage for one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries of the decade. The island of Edøya was small, surrounded by cold northern waters, and known mainly for its fishing farms and a medieval church that stood like a memory of the past. But beneath its green fields, something ancient was waiting to be found. A team from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, known as NIKU, arrived with a simple plan. They were there to use a modern tool called ground-penetrating radar. This technology could send radio waves deep into the earth and read what lay beneath. The team was led by Dr. Knut Posch, a man who believed that every piece of land had a hidden story. As the machine began to hum and move across the soft soil, the radar's screen started showing lines, shapes, and patches of color that represented buried objects. At first, everything looked ordinary. There were traces of old settlements and stones. But then, something appeared on the monitor that made everyone pause. It was a strange, massive circular shape buried just below the topsoil. The formation stretched almost 60 feet across, far too symmetrical to be natural. One researcher described it as looking like a giant eye staring back from the earth. The pattern was so perfect that it immediately suggested human design, but from what time and for what purpose, no one could say yet. Excitement filled the air. The researchers double-checked their equipment, thinking it might be a glitch. But as the radar continued to sweep the area, the same outline appeared again and again. This was no mistake. Something extraordinary was buried there. The circular formation seemed to surround a long, narrow shape at its center. The outline looked unlike any building or fence or boundary they had seen before. It looked like the skeleton of a ship. When the team realized this, silence fell over the field. The idea that a Viking longship might be hidden just a few feet beneath a simple Norwegian farm was unbelievable. Such finds were incredibly rare. Only a few had ever been uncovered in the entire country, and those discoveries had rewritten history books. If this was indeed a ship, it meant that the soil beneath them could contain the remains of a high-ranking Viking leader, perhaps a king or chieftain, buried with honor more than 1,000 years ago. Dr. Posch later said that the find felt like hearing the voice of the past speaking directly through the ground. The team marked the coordinates carefully and began studying the radar data in detail. The circular mound around the ship appeared to be a burial site, carefully shaped by human hands. The ship seemed to rest inside a circular enclosure that might once have been a visible mound rising from the landscape, now flattened by time and farming. What made the discovery even more special was how accidental it was. The field where the ship was found had not even been part of their original plan. The team had already completed their assigned area, but decided to do a quick scan nearby before leaving. That small decision turned out to be life-changing. Within hours, they had evidence of something that connected directly to the heart of Norway's Viking past. The archaeologists stood under the fading autumn light, looking across the field that now felt alive with secrets. They knew they had found something monumental, but they did not yet understand how big the story would become. The radar had shown them only a shadow, but beneath it could lie treasures, weapons, and even human remains. It could tell them how the Vikings lived, fought, and honored their dead. It could also reveal new clues about how ancient beliefs merged with the coming of Christianity in Norway. The discovery on that September day was just the beginning. Beneath the calm soil of Edøya, the past had whispered its first words, and now the archaeologists were determined to listen. As night fell over the island and the equipment was packed away, one thought lingered in everyone's mind. This tiny island, quiet for centuries, had just changed its place in history. But why was this particular spot chosen for such a grand burial? The answer, it seemed, was hidden in the island itself, a place filled with ancient secrets waiting to rise once more. The Island of Secrets. Edøya is a small island surrounded by the restless waters of western Norway. From above, it looks peaceful and green, but beneath that calm beauty lies a story that stretches back thousands of years. The island covers only a few square miles, yet it has seen more history than its size suggests. It belongs to the municipality of Smola, a place whose name comes from an old Norwegian word meaning to crumble. The land here is fractured and broken, scattered with marshes and small inlets where the sea creeps in like a thief. Only a small part of Smola is good for farming. Most of it is too wet or rocky, so people have always turned to the sea for their living. The waters around Edøya are rich with life. For centuries, fishermen have caught halibut, cod, herring, monkfish, and mackerel here. These same waters once carried Viking ships filled with traders and warriors. But long before the Vikings, long before kings and kingdoms, this region had already been home to humans. When the last ice age ended about 12,000 years ago, the first people came to these shores. They hunted reindeer, fished the cold waters, and followed the warm currents of the Gulf Stream. Around 7,000 years ago, they began to settle down, planting crops and building the first small communities. The Neolithic period had arrived, and with it came new tools, better boats, and the beginnings of trade. Over time, contact with distant lands began to shape Norwegian culture. In the 1st century AD, the influence of the Roman Empire reached the north. Norwegian traders exchanged furs, skins, and amber for weapons, jewelry, and other goods. Some Norwegians even served as mercenaries in the Roman armies. From these connections came new ideas, alphabets, architecture, and systems of leadership. The old tribal structures began to change, and powerful chieftains rose to rule over local clans. By the time the Viking Age began about 1,300 years ago, the people of this region had become masters of the sea. They built ships that could cross entire oceans, raiding and trading across Europe. They also held strong beliefs about death and the afterlife. To them, dying in battle was the greatest honor, for it led to Valhalla, the hall of eternal glory. A man's ship was his pride in life, and his vessel to the next world in death. That belief would soon become important in the mystery of Edøya. The island's strategic position made it an ideal home for Viking leaders. It stood along sea routes, connecting Norway's rugged coast to distant lands like Iceland, Ireland, and the British Isles. It was both remote and central, far enough to be hidden, yet close enough to control trade and power. Archaeologists believe Edøya was not just a simple fishing island, but once a center of influence for local rulers who commanded fleets and lands. At the heart of Edøya stood its small parish church, originally built around 1190. It was one of the earliest Christian buildings in the area. The church was destroyed by fire in the late 19th century and rebuilt after the Second World War, but its foundation still rests on ancient ground. When archaeologists later discovered the buried ship just next to it, they began to wonder if this was more than coincidence. Was the church built beside an older sacred site to show the triumph of Christianity over Old Norse beliefs? The land around the church feels timeless. Winds sweep across the open fields, and the air smells of salt and pine. Few people live here now, yet traces of the past are everywhere. Stones from old foundations, fragments of pottery, and silent mounds that might hide untold stories. The island has always been a place where nature and history meet quietly. For centuries, locals must have walked over that very field, unaware that something precious lay sleeping beneath their feet. The idea that a Viking longship rested just 2 feet below the soil seems almost unreal. Yet, the radar scans left no doubt. Somewhere below, a ship, and perhaps its ancient passenger, had been waiting for over 1,000 years. Why was Udoya chosen for such an extraordinary burial? Was it because of its beauty, its isolation, or its ancient importance? The island had witnessed every stage of Norway's evolution, from hunters and farmers to traders and warriors. Perhaps the chieftain buried there had ruled these lands when the old and new worlds of belief collided. The archaeologists who made the discovery could sense that this was more than just a local find. It was a missing piece in the grand puzzle of Norwegian history. And now that the first clues had surfaced, the next step would take them deeper into the world of the Viking kings themselves. Because before they could understand the ship, they had to understand the men who ruled the seas and shaped a nation. Rise of the Viking kings. Long before Norway became a united kingdom, it was a land divided among powerful chieftains who ruled small territories scattered along its coasts and valleys. Each clan had its own leader, its own warriors, and its own ambitions. The people lived by the rhythm of the sea, farming when the weather allowed, and sailing when it did not. But the restless spirit of the Norsemen could not be contained by their fjords forever. They began to look outward, across the cold northern waters, seeking new lands, riches, and power. Around the 9th century, this ambition led to one of the most dramatic transformations in European history. Out of the chaos of rival clans emerged a man named Harald Fairhair. According to the sagas written centuries later, he was a young and determined warrior who swore an oath to conquer all of Norway. His motivation, legend says, came from love. The daughter of a neighboring king refused to marry him until he had united the land under his rule. Whether the story is true or not, Harald's conquest became the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Norway. By 872 AD, after years of fierce battles and shifting alliances, Harald won the decisive Battle of Hafrsfjord. It was one of the bloodiest fights ever recorded in the early history of Norway. When the smoke cleared, the rival chieftains were defeated, and for the first time, Norway had a single ruler. Harald Fairhair became the first king of a united Norway. His victory did more than bring peace. It created a foundation for a new era, one defined by royal power, trade, and the expansion of Norse influence across Europe. The rise of kingship changed everything. Viking society had always been organized around loyalty to local leaders, but now, the power of one man could stretch from the southern coast to the icy north. The king ruled with the help of stewards and jarls who managed lands in his name. The system was far from perfect, but it gave Norway a new identity and strength. Still, beneath the new unity, the old Viking spirit remained. The Vikings were not just raiders and warriors. They were also skilled shipbuilders, farmers, traders, and poets. Their longships, built with extraordinary craftsmanship, could travel through both open seas and shallow rivers. With these vessels, they reached as far as England, France, and even the edges of the Mediterranean. They founded settlements in Ireland and Scotland and established trading ports that would grow into great cities like Dublin. Each journey brought wealth and new ideas, but also danger and death. For the Vikings, death was not an end, but a passage. They believed that brave warriors went to Valhalla, the great hall of Odin, where they would feast and fight forever. To die in battle was an honor. To die as a coward was a shame. Their ships, therefore, were more than tools of war and trade. They were sacred. When a great leader died, his ship often became his coffin, a vessel that would carry him into the afterlife. Inside, the dead were placed with their weapons, jewelry, and sometimes even their servants or animals who were meant to follow them into the next world. It was this belief that shaped the tradition of ship burials. A burial mound was not just a grave, but a symbol of power. The size of the mound and the ship inside it reflected the importance of the person buried there. Only the most honored were given such a final voyage. These mounds were built to be seen from afar, reminders to the living of who ruled the land and the sea. The buried ship discovered on Edoya likely belonged to someone of great status. Perhaps it was the final resting place of a chieftain who had once controlled the seas around the island, a man who commanded fleets and warriors, and whose rule linked the old pagan world with the new Christian one that was beginning to rise. The mound above him would have been a proud mark of his authority, visible to every ship that passed through the surrounding waters. As centuries passed, the mound flattened and grass grew over it. The church later built beside it may have been a deliberate choice, a symbol of Christianity taking root on land that had once belonged to the followers of Odin and Thor. It was a silent victory of the cross over the hammer, but beneath that soil, the memory of the old gods never truly faded. The archaeologists who uncovered the ship on Edoya could sense this layered history, a bridge between two worlds. What they had found was not just a burial. It was a message from a time when faith, power, and the sea ruled every part of life. The question was no longer about what they had found. They knew that for certain. The question now was what lay inside. The ghost ship beneath the farm. The discovery on Edoya quickly became the talk of Norway's archaeological world. Yet, even after the radar confirmed the presence of a Viking longship, the team knew they had only seen a shadow of what truly lay beneath the ground. The field beside the old church now carried an invisible weight, the memory of a burial older than the stones around it. When experts began to study the radar data in detail, the image of the ship slowly came to life. The vessel was buried beneath only 2 feet of soil, preserved in the darkness for over 1,000 years. The data showed a central keel running along its base, forming the ship's spine. Some of its timbers were still intact, protected by the damp earth that had sealed them from oxygen. But the bow and stern were gone, destroyed long ago by plowing. The farmers who had tilled this land for generations had unknowingly passed their plows over one of history's greatest relics. From the size and shape of the remains, experts estimated that the ship had been about 55 feet long when first built. It was large enough to carry 12 men across the sea, yet elegant and finely crafted. The circular outline around the ship was also visible on the radar. It was a mound, carefully constructed from earth and stone to cover the vessel after burial. This was not a ship meant for battle. It was a funerary ship, a vessel for the dead. In Viking belief, the sea was both a pathway and a barrier between worlds. To bury someone inside a ship was to give them a means to journey into the afterlife. Only the most powerful individuals, kings, queens, chieftains, or great warriors, were granted such an honor. Ordinary people were buried in the earth. The elite sailed into eternity. Dr. Nut Posh, NICU's head of digital archaeology, described the find as one of the most exciting discoveries in decades. He said that it was the first Viking ship burial in Norway to be documented using modern 21st century technology. This meant that scientists could study it in great detail without disturbing the soil. Unlike the earlier ship finds, like the famous Oseberg and Gokstad ships, which were excavated more than a century ago, this one could be analyzed with precise digital imaging. The find also held deeper meaning. The last known Viking ship burial had been discovered in 2018 at Gjellestad in southeastern Norway. The Adoya ship seemed to belong to the same period. Both vessels shared similar shapes and sizes, suggesting that they may have been built during the same era, possibly even by related groups. These similarities opened a new window into Viking traditions and regional connections. The question of who had been buried inside the ship was impossible to answer without excavation, but archaeologists had their theories. The island's position on the coast made it a hub for seafaring chieftains. It could have been the grave of a powerful local ruler, someone who held both political and spiritual influence. The presence of the nearby church, built centuries later, hinted that this land had long been a place of reverence. As more scans were completed, something else caught the team's attention. The radar showed not just the ship, but other shapes nearby. Long rectangular structures that looked like ancient houses. These new findings suggested that the burial site was part of a much larger complex, perhaps an entire settlement or ceremonial ground. The archaeologists now faced a new mystery. What were those structures surrounding the mound? Were they homes for the living, or temples for the dead? As the team prepared to study the site further, the radar began to reveal even more shapes, longhouses, pillars, and patterns that hinted at rituals lost to time. The ghost ship was only the beginning. The land still had many stories left to tell. The houses of the dead. When the archaeologists continued scanning the field around the buried ship on Edoya, they expected to find only small traces of Viking activity, perhaps a few tools, post holes, or boundary lines. Instead, the radar revealed something much larger and stranger. Around the circular burial mound lay a group of long rectangular shapes, buried deep beneath the soil. Each was the size of a small hall, stretching across the field in quiet symmetry. These shapes were the remains of longhouses, ancient structures that once stood beside the ship. Their outlines showed up clearly on the radar scans. Some were as long as 60 feet, while others were smaller, but all shared the same design. The archaeologists immediately knew this was not an ordinary discovery. Finding both a ship burial and longhouses in one place suggested that Edoya had been more than a burial site. It had been a center of life, power, and ritual. Longhouses were the heart of Viking society. Built from timber, turf, and clay, they served as homes, meeting halls, and symbols of strength. Inside, families cooked over open fires, worked on crafts, stored tools, and sheltered livestock during harsh winters. The thick walls, made of wood and sod, kept out the biting northern winds. At night, the flicker of flames lit the carved beams, and the air filled with the smell of smoke, ale, and roasted meat. But the longhouses near the Edoya mound seemed different. They were placed too close to the burial site, and their alignment suggested ritual purpose rather than daily living. Archaeologists began to suspect that these were not homes for the living, but houses for the dead. Across Scandinavia, a few similar discoveries have been made. Longhouses built within burial grounds, possibly used for ceremonies honoring the spirits of ancestors. Some scholars call them death houses. They may have been built for rituals performed after burial, where offerings were made and the dead were celebrated before being left to rest. The radar images also showed that the longhouses were of varying ages. Some appeared older than the burial mound itself, possibly dating back to the Iron Age, around 300 AD. Others seemed newer, closer in age to the Viking period. This suggested that the site had been used for centuries, long before the ship burial took place. It was as if each generation had added its mark to this sacred land, layering their stories one on top of another. The area around Edøya was perfect for such a settlement. It stood along a vital sea route that connected coastal Norway to distant lands. From here, ships could travel west toward the North Atlantic or south toward the trading ports of Denmark. The island's location made it a powerful base for local rulers who depended on both farming and seafaring. The presence of large ceremonial buildings near the burial mound hinted that this was once a political and spiritual center. As experts studied the data, they began to realize how carefully planned the site was. The ship burial sat in the center like a heart, and the longhouses surrounded it in what looked like deliberate order. The circular mound itself might have been visible from far out at sea, serving as a symbol of authority. The people buried here wanted to be remembered. They wanted their power to be seen even after death. Lars Gustafsson, one of the NIKU archaeologists, explained that such sites were designed to show influence and legacy. The mound was not only a tomb, but a monument. It told everyone who passed by that this land once belonged to someone important, someone whose spirit still watched over it. The longhouses could have been built for religious gatherings, seasonal festivals, or rituals meant to honor the ancestors. Then there was the church, standing nearby like a silent witness. Built in 1190, centuries after the ship burial, it marked the spread of Christianity across Norway. But its location raised questions. Why build a church so close to a pagan cemetery? Was it a coincidence? Or a statement of conquest, the cross rising beside the graves of those who once worshipped Odin and Thor? As the archaeologists examined the site, they realized they had uncovered not just one story, but many. The ship, the houses, the mound, and the church all told different parts of a tale that spanned 1,000 years, a tale of power, faith, and memory. The land itself seemed alive with echoes, whispering of lives once lived in glory and loss. But for all they had found, one thing remained out of reach. No one had yet seen what was inside the ship itself. The archaeologists had only its shape, its ghost beneath the soil. To uncover what it held, bones, treasures, or secrets, would require excavation. For now, the team chose patience. The ground had protected the ship for a millennium. It could keep its secret a little longer. The unfinished investigation. The discovery on Edøya had reached every corner of Norway's archaeological community. Scientists, historians, and students were all drawn to this quiet island that had suddenly become a bridge between two worlds, the ancient and the modern. Yet, despite the excitement, the site remained untouched. The team from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research had decided that no spades would break the soil, not yet. They wanted to protect the ship and everything around it until the right moment, when the best possible technology could reveal its secrets without destroying them. For now, the Viking ship would stay exactly where it had rested for more than 1,000 years. The archaeologists continued to study the digital data collected by the ground-penetrating radar. Every signal was examined, every shape and curve of the ship was measured, and reconstructed in 3 dimensions. On their computer screens in Oslo, the past began to rise again, a ghostly outline of a longship floating in a sea of soil. Its ribs, keel, and hull formed a beautiful pattern, built by hands long gone. The structure's speed or symmetry and craftsmanship told them that this was not an ordinary burial. It was a royal one. Experts compared the Edøya ship with other famous Viking ship burials. Norway had only 3 major finds before this: the Oseberg, the Gokstad, and the Tun ships. Each of these had revealed priceless treasures, ornate sleds, weapons, jewelry, and the remains of noble individuals buried with their possessions. The Edøya ship seemed to belong to the same tradition, but its discovery through modern radar technology made it even more extraordinary. This time, the archaeologists could study the ship's form without disturbing a single piece of wood. Each possibility carried both hope and danger. If the grave was untouched, it could change everything historians knew about Viking culture. But if it had been disturbed, all that might remain were fragments of wood and faint traces of human life. Either way, the discovery had already deepened the understanding of Norway's past. It showed how advanced Viking shipbuilding had been, and how their spiritual beliefs shaped every part of their society. The presence of the church nearby continued to fascinate the researchers. The contrast between the Christian building and the pagan burial beside it told a quiet story of Norway's transformation. It was as though 2 faiths shared the same piece of land, one buried beneath the soil, the other reaching toward the heavens. Perhaps the church builders had known what lay below, and their decision to build there had been symbolic. The cross had replaced the hammer, yet both still watched over the island together. The team also began to map the area beyond the ship and the longhouses, hoping to find more evidence of settlements or cemeteries. Each scan revealed faint traces of circular and rectangular patterns that hinted at more burials waiting underground. It seemed the entire area might have once been a complex of ritual and power, a cemetery that marked the final resting place of an elite Viking family. For now, time would have to keep its hold over the secrets of Edøya. The archaeologists planned to continue their research using non-destructive techniques and to share their findings with museums and universities across Norway. They knew that someday, perhaps years from now, an excavation might finally take place. But that day would come only when technology could promise full preservation. The buried ship of Edøya still hides its secrets beneath the earth, untouched for over 1,000 years. What do you think lies inside this ancient Viking tomb? Share your thoughts in the comments below.